Good morning, it's Corrine. This morning and yesterday, what seems to have been spinning in my head the most was concerning INFJs and relationships. And I don't necessarily mean romantic relationships, I just mean just relationships. So any other contact with another person and how that person makes you feel or seemingly makes you feel. And this came into my mind because I was really lucky yesterday and I got to see an old friend that I hadn't seen in a long time. It seemed like the universe opened up and suddenly we both had time in our schedules and it was wonderful, and it really got me to thinking about this. And I had gotten back in touch with this friend because a couple months ago I was feeling really down because about some circumstances in my life. And when I tend to get that way, I tend to isolate myself, and which I think is a normal INFJ thing to do. We kind of, isolate in order to feel better because, society around us is not making us feel good. So we escape and we isolate. And at some point I was realizing I was isolating. I kind of became conscious of it. And then I made this list of people in my life that really made me feel better, being who I was, being an INFJ and really accepting me for exactly who I was and not trying to change it. And like I said, I'm 47 years old, so, I'm almost half a century, and I came up with about between 7 to 10 people that I felt like I could really, really talk to. And, it doesn't seem like much when you think you've lived almost half a century. But I think with INFJs, it's really true. We're just kind of not willing to let a whole lot of people into our inner circle. And I've noticed that in, things I've read. And I think part of it is that, not being understood, kind of being programmed that, well, nobody's going to understand me, so why even bother letting certain people in? So, but when you do let people in, the relationships are wonderful and they are lifelong and beautiful and really worth it. So I do think a really good healing activity is to make that list of people, and then, if you can, contact them, don't freak them out or anything, but just get to, stay back in touch, because it seems to me that no matter what, that's the type of person that when you get in touch, they'll be happy and you'll just have a really good meeting of the minds, and which I think is what an INFJ is looking for, is this meeting of the minds. And, for a while I thought, when I was first kind of studying this, and I was thinking, well, the only people who really understand me are other INFJs or other INFPs. And which seems, I definitely, in that small circle, I would say probably half of the people there are what I would say is either INFJ or INFP. Two of the closest ones are my two best friends who I met in college, who happened just randomly be put together as roommates, and we're still very, very close. And they both, tell me that they test as INFJ and sometimes as INFP, which is basically what I do as well. And I think how extraordinary that we were lucky enough to be put together. And these are people who I feel really, really comfortable with. And but now I'm also realizing that it's really not just INFJ, INFP, because I met with my friend yesterday and he's into psychology and stuff. And I said, well, and I asked him about the Myers-Briggs. I said, do you know what your type is? And he said he was an ENFP. And then like these light bulbs went off in my mind. And because I had read that the ENFP and the INFJ are really good matches as friends. And so that was kind of exciting to actually find that out. And I realized, he wasn't the only one that was ENFP within my circle of friends. There was also another guy who was a really close friend when I was in high school. And these were not boyfriends. These were just, close platonic friendships, who I believe is the same personality type. And looking back on it, it makes sense, because these were extroverted people who were kind of always having fun, life of the party, fun things like that. And I always was kind of wondering, why were they interested in me? Like, why were they interested in a friendship with me? Because, my own feeling about myself was I was the ultimate wallflower. Yet they were willing to come over and start a friendship with me and really be interested in me, really want to cheer me up, and want to have a one-on-one philosophical relationship with me. Because when and I kind of forgot these people were extroverted in the sense that my profound relationships with them were one-on-one pretty much, like I can now like think, oh yeah, they were kind of the life of the party. They were the popular, people that people wanted to be around. But most of the time that I recall with our friendship was just hanging out in a room and talking and with one-on-one and having them be really interested in the things I had to say and vice versa. And so our friendships aren't really, limited to any other, INFs or, INTJ or, the INs. There really are some extroverted people that we can feel comfortable with and have these lifelong relationships with. And, when I look at my, and we need to value all these relationships. When I look at my relationship list, some of them are friends, some girlfriends, and some of them are guy friends who are just platonic friends, and then some of them were sort of older person figures that were sort of like mother figures to me, who just, really made me feel like, oh, it's okay to be who I am, which unfortunately I didn't get from my parents. And I think it sort of set up my mind a lot for, oh, there's something wrong with me. And, I'm still working on, understanding my parents in the sense that, my father was, the inspector type, the TJ, and my mother was the manager type, the ESTJ. So they're programmed to find faults in me and try to fix them. And knowing that actually brings me a lot of comfort, because otherwise it's just a whole lot of frustration and just upsetting, like what's wrong with me. But then I need to go back and see my list of people, and realize, look at all these people who thought I was just fine. The only person on my list that I have or had a romantic relationship was my husband, who I eventually married, and he's he's either INFJ or INFP. I'm really not sure, but he's one of those kind, gentle souls who will sit and listen and understand me. So when I have these issues with my parents and I get off the phone with them and I have 3 days of being upset about it, he's willing to sit and talk to me and completely understand, what the situation is. And the good thing is I understand him too, because we sort of have this, similar working style. We're both self-employed. He's had situations where he has tried working for companies, and he had this one job which was in a big a big corporation, and he had a little cubicle amongst a sea of cubicles, and he would talk about that time as being his time in his prison cell, because he just felt like so much lack of freedom. And so the nice thing is we can understand each other. And the problem with, I think, INFJs having relationships with other INFJs, especially as, a life partner, is we're sort of like the blind leading the blind into the real world because we both escape, we both, want our freedom. We're not money-oriented people. So, I can see how having a relationship like a life partner as an E, how that could be, really helpful, assuming that E person, that extroverted person that feels good in the real world, assuming that they're the right match, personality-wise with us. But, and so I can see how that happened, but I'm still very happy having a, INFJ or P husband, just because it's nice to have somebody there who completely understands you. And not that our relationship is perfect. I mean, certainly lots of ups and downs. But I did go to the ends of the earth to find him, in the sense that, when I was in college, it was still during the Cold War, and he was on the other side of the world in the Soviet Union. And I met him on a trip abroad, and we stayed in touch, and eventually he came over. So, in the meantime, I got all sorts of letters, just really supportive INF letters from him, which, kept me going, knowing there was somebody out there. And I think once we find something we want, we really, go for it. So, and back then it was pretty hard. Back then I used to write a letter, and it would take 3 weeks to get to where he was, and he'd write a letter, and it'd take 3 weeks to get back to where I was. So we'd ask a question, a month and a half later we'd get an answer. So, and in the world now of Skype, I think, young people are so lucky, or anybody in any sort of long distance relationship has to really count themselves as lucky. So, yeah, so I'd say, go back and look at your relationships in life, especially if you're feeling down, and think about those people that made you feel really, really good, and use that one. And Facebook is an amazing thing. It still amazes me at how quickly you can think about somebody and then suddenly be messaging them back and forth. And that's really the only thing I use Facebook for. I'm not a big fan of posting things and looking at it every day. But I do think it's just a wonderful thing for finding old friends. Well, so that's just what I wanted to leave you with. And, even though we're people who tend to kind of be to ourselves, I think we can have wonderful relationships. So, hope you have a wonderful day. Bye.